Okay, class, Professor K here. Today we're going to learn the fundamentals of drawing a sphere or a cylinder, which kind of covers the gamut of round, semi-round shapes. And what I've done is combine these on the same page. So I've drawn this already, but I'm going to go through the steps in terms of how I drew this. And for folks that are actually in my class, there's going to be a bunch of individual photos step by step. The way this starts is with a circle. I used a roll of tape and sketched in the middle of that. You could use some type of canister. This is roughly 3 inches, which is pretty good size, pretty good measurement. And even when I do actual setups in a classroom, and I'm also going to do a setup with a real ball and a real cylinder, both white. I'm going to light that, and that's going to be another thing that you can work from. I tend to like to use a 45-degree angle coming down from the left. Doesn't really matter. It could be the left, could be the right. The angle is important because we want to cast a shadow, so we don't want it straight overhead. We definitely don't want it directly from the side. So a 45-degree angle. If we're drawing a sphere, the first thing we do is drawing this circle. I tend to like to get students to draw it by hand in class, although it's very hard to draw a perfect circle. But I laugh because a lot of students will try and draw with their wrist and try and make a circle. The best way to make a real circle is use the whole motion of your arm. So if you were doing it freehand, what you would do is just literally move your arm around and then start to strike the paper. And rather than make one definitive line, make a series of lines and then try and clean that up. No, so we're doing the easy way. We're just going to take something to use to put down and make a circle. So the first thing, you have this sphere. I think the most important first item to look at is what's called the core, the darkest area. And if light is coming down here, light is striking this object, this ball, and where the light is missing it the most is through here, okay? And that is the core, the darkest area in terms of defining that form. The fallacy is that if you think the lighting is coming from here, and this is the dark side of the ball, you would tend to shade and keep shading and make this darkest edge the darkest part of the shape. And then you would wonder why it doesn't look quite right. Okay, and the reason for that is that the core is where the light is missing it. So as again, through here is the darkest, and what happens in here where it's lighter, not light like here, okay, it's just and all these changes, by the way, are always as gradual as you can make them. Something that's round is not going to make a transition from dark to light in any rapid fashion. It's going to kind of diffuse this way, diffuse that way. The more you can keep that soft, the better. So here's the core. All right, now why is that edge out here still a little lighter? Why doesn't it go all the way to the end? It's from what is right here called reflected light. It means there's always going to be some kind of light in the room, from a window, possibly from other lights in a room, depending on the surface that's being used. Light is going to bounce around, and as light bounces down and kicks back up a little bit, that's the reason that you have this dark area, but it starts to get a little bit lighter toward that edge. Okay, very, very, very important. If you were doing a still life and you had have a whole thing of grapes that you're going to draw, you're actually going to see all those individual grapes, okay? And you're going to see this happen, even though it's an elongated shape, it's an oval, you're going to see this kind of happen with almost every grape, where there's going to be a core, there's going to be a little bit of reflected light, and on the flip side over here is what? That's where the light is bouncing back directly. So it's reflecting straight back to the light, and it's making this bright spot, which is called the highlight. Okay, so you have the core, you have a highlight. Notice it's a little tone in here, but where it's hitting most directly to that area right there, that is pure white. If you draw this whole thing in this area, and you can, by the way, you can smudge a little bit with your fingers. If there's some tone there where that's going to be the highlight, I would take an eraser and erase that area back so that you get kind of pure white there. Can't be brighter than the brightness of the paper, so that acts as that reflected area of pure light. I say reflected, I mean it's reflecting back. I don't want to confuse that with reflected light where it's coming down, kicking back off the surface thing around here and reflecting back in here, reflecting back in here and in here. All right, and that kind of covers it. The fourth item is a shadow. And I don't really particularly get too involved with teaching classes with the shadows. We see the shape, it's an ellipse that's cast by this. There's a line here and a line there which kind of connects to the edge of the shadow from the light source, the rays that are going out. But, you know, it's nice. It's nice to put in the shadow. But to me, this is where it's at. This is your drawing. This is your form. Okay? And if you look at the great works of, you know, great artists through history, you're looking at form and their ability to capture that form. And it's what's happening in there versus shadows, which may or may not happen in the composition. Theoretically, it's not really, I don't really like to see this drawn line on the edge. You're kind of forced to do that. But what I do with an actual setup with a class, whether it's drawing or watercolor, is I put a dark background behind the subject that we're lighting and we're painting or drawing, and I have the students put in this dark tone behind the object. And that tone is what defines the edge. When you see a dark edge going up to the item, you don't need those lines. We don't see lines in the real world. We don't look at an item and see outlines. We look at an item and we see separation like I have over here. I didn't do it on this side, but here's a cylinder, which I'm going to talk about next. And just for a tiny little part of it, I put a little tone in the background. Okay? And that background, notice here, makes that line go away. The background here makes that line go away. If I had tone around the whole item, we would see the shape of it defined wonderfully, and it wouldn't be because of the use of line. It would be because of contrasting tones that define the shape. So moving on to the cylinder. Cylinder, believe it or not, is the same principles of what's happening with a sphere or a ball, except that it's an elongated item. Okay, it's a tube. So here's the way the principles work. Here's the light source. Again, I'm using a 45-degree angle. I'm taking an angle and I'm drawing a couple of parallel lines to cheat, to make it easier. And then I have an ellipsis. Okay, the ellipsis you'll see on the step-by-step sheet shows the ellipsis here and shows how that exact ellipsis is repeated there. From this standpoint of this ellipse, would mean that we're slightly looking down on this object so we can slightly see into the inside. If our point of view was looking up at this cylinder, we would not be able to see at all into it. Okay, but it's always nice if we have a hollow item to be able to see into it a little bit. So back to the same principles here. Here is the core. Light is coming this way. It's hitting the object. This is where it's missing the object the most, straight through this area here. And here's some tone, but notice that the tone gets lighter at the edge, once again because what's here? Reflected light bouncing around and hitting the edge of this item a little bit. Okay? And this is a tough one because you really have to diffuse this. You can be sketching any which way, shapes like that, or you can literally be shading like that with your pencil, or you can be doing elongated lines to shade. But what you want to accomplish is getting this transition of a really dark area where the core is, transitioning into this lighter area, okay, where there's still tone and then just a little bit of light at the edge. On the flip side, it's a longer, smoother transition from dark, medium, light. Okay, and then what happens is through here is that highlight again. This is where the light is really hitting that side. Maybe I should have drawn the light source a little bit more over there, but I just redid it from the top part. So this here is your highlight running straight down here. Again, pure white. Actually, you can see what I'm doing with the eraser. It looks white, but I'm actually making it a little bit lighter. So there's that bright highlight going down the side, and there's even a little bit of tone here, but this is where the light is kind of striking the item, and through here is where the light is missing the item, and then again over here is reflected light. On top, being that we're seeing into this item, the darkest part of this whole composition, maybe besides the shadow, is this area right in here. Because if the light's coming this way, there is no way any light is getting at this corner inside this cylinder. So this is kind of what brings this thing to life a lot, because it's super dark here. It starts to diffuse, and there's a little bit of light that's kind of getting somewhat inside this shape. Also, and it's not easy to do, notice that I did a double line here. That represents the thickness of this PVC tube that I was rendering. Okay, so that has a thickness that's like a 1/4 of an inch, whatever, 3/8 of an inch thickness. So by having that double line up there, there's the thickness of this item, and the shading inside, if that's the top, now as we go down is where it's really, really dark in here and maybe getting a little bit lighter as some light is starting to hit the inside of that from the 45-degree angled lighting. That's it. I mean, you got, again, 45-degree angle lighting, circle, here's the core, here's the highlight, okay, here's reflected light, shadow, and here's 45 again. Here's the core, here's a little bit of reflected light, here's the tone gradually wrapping all the way around, and here's the highlight where light is really kicking back directly against that light that it's lit. So this is what we're after. Forget all the notes on here. All I want you folks to draw in my class is to do a circle, draw a cylinder, okay, look at my step-by-step images, shade this as best you can. It's kind of fun to try and really bring this to life through your shading. If you wanted to experiment like I've done here, you can put a little bit of tone behind here. If you wanted to, you could even kind of sketch in some really dark tone. If you put some tone, make sure it's real dark. If you put in light tone through here, it's going to kind of blend into the object. So just, you know, sketching in a little bit of tone back here has to be very dark so it really supports and all of a sudden brings that edge. I can't stress enough, because if you had tone there, again, this is just a drawing so we're not worried about it, but if this was a real composition or watercolor or whatever, I'd be having this tone go right up to that edge. You would not see that line. You would see the separation of the tone that goes up to that shape. And what's so beautiful with that, if you look what happens here compared to here, you can see these edges really come to life in terms of how they're defined and how you see a light as a light source that's hitting that, and not as an outline that's drawn by hand. That's it. I think I've covered everything I want to do with this, so good luck with it, and thank you.